Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Porcella. I am a Slate communications strategist with the Slate optimization team with Carnegie. Excited to be with you all today for our first Slate demo series, where we'll be teaching you some of the how-tos of Slate. Today, we're focusing on really building a recipient list for parents, but in configurable joins. Why is this important? Well, at its core, when you're building recipient lists, you certainly could go the traditional route of making one for students and then having parents carbon copy on that mailing using a parent filter. That's fine and dandy, but the downside to that is that if the parent gets an email and opts out of said message, then that actually opts out their student as well. Obviously not ideal. So the benefit here, first and foremost, is when we build this in configurable joins, the parents are on a different table within Slate, and so you actually are talking to them directly, meaning that if they opt out of an email that you send them, they're opting themselves out, not their student. So that is the big pro. There are certainly others as well. Configurable joins, of course, is where we're all heading, but today we'll be talking about how to build one of these queries. And it's actually a lot simpler than you would think. So I guess first things first, some of the obvious stuff, get into Slate. So I don't need to spend a lot of time here, but you'll dive into Slate and you'll actually go into our favorite module, or at least my favorite module, which is Deliver. Within Deliver, you'll simply click New Mailing because we're going to be starting this from a mailing itself. You could practice this by building it as a query, but we'll pretend we've already got that expertise. So go in and click New Mailing. From here, it doesn't so much matter what you name it. This will be for your purposes. But for our purposes today, we're going to call it Parent Mailing Number 1. Put it in a folder. We'll assign it to us as a user. Nothing else for our purposes today matters so much, but when you're done, hit save. And that will bring you to a familiar slide if you've ever been in Deliver before. So in this case, we've got our mailing here. And what we're going to do first and foremost is go build our recipient list. So you can click that on the right, edit recipient lists. That brings you to a screen you also might be familiar with. Again, we'll not spend a ton of time here, but you'll go to New Query because we're going to be building the query within the mailing. And here is where you do things a little bit different than, say, building a standard recipient list where you're just carbon copying the parent. So in this case, we'll call it Parent CJ. You can name it whatever you'd like. And then these three areas at the bottom are what might be a little different. We are going to build this in configurable joins. This will not be in the local base. And doing that gives us the option of category and base. Related and relation are not exactly the same, but the names are similar and they do serve similar purposes. But for our category, related just means a table that is related to that person table. And then our base here is what we're actually, the type of person in this case we're trying to grab. So that'll be relation because we're looking for parents and family members. Once you're in there, you'll notice something that if you've ever used queries, you'll be familiar with. And if you haven't used configurable joins before, it looks very similar, except you've got these one-to-many symbols over here in the exports and the filters. If I were to scroll down, you'd have a section for joins. And then, of course, our base says configurable joins relation. What you're going to do first is click into your exports. And I guess to go back one slide here for a moment, just click into your exports here, just a standard export for now. And you'll look for a couple things. One thing that I always like to point out to folks is that these light blue areas here, and you'll see hundreds of them if you keep scrolling, these are each tables, and these are each with a table within the relational database that is Slate. So in our case, because we are on the related relation configurable joins base, we're getting this table first. So if we're going to send emails to parents, we need a couple things. It would be nice to have their email address, certainly important. And then also their first name. If we want to be able to say, dear parent's first name or whatever, we'd like to be able to address them by their first name. But then you'll also do something different. You can hit save there and it'll pop up. I'll show you in a second what that looks like. But we are also going to grab one other piece of information, optional, but I like to grab this. We're going to search for person, and you can see here we were on this relation table before. But when I search for person, we also get access to the person table in this extended exports area. And you'll see what the difference is here in a moment. We're not on this table currently. As you remember from when we started this, we were on the related relation table, but now we're jumping over to the person table. And this is something that can, drumroll, configurably join. So now we're just going to search for first name. The difference here is when we were looking in the relation table, we pulled relation first name. That's the parent's first name or the guardian or step parent's first name. Whereas when we're in this person table, this is the person's or student's first name. So when we grab that and click save, you'll get a different window here. It is actually asking you now to make the join. Now, Technolutions and Slate does a lot of this work for you, even though Configurable Joins gives you more power. But you can actually now just click that you're looking to join the table relation to person, and your join name is person. So usually it defaults to this. There's nothing fancy you need to do here, but just know that's what's going on behind the scenes. And once you do that, and you click save here, you see that your exports are all in. There's nothing fancy here with one-to-many symbols, and it doesn't need to be. For our purposes here, again, we're taking relation first name, relation email, and the student's first name. And you could certainly rename these if you so chose. So now let's focus on our filters. So you'll click into this filters area here. Nothing fancy we need with the one-to-many symbol yet. Just click standard filters. And there will be a few things that we want. So first, relationship type. Who are these people in relation to the student? Because I don't think we're going to necessarily want to email a sibling. Maybe you do. That could be a conversation for another day. But we'll click relationship type here. And in our case, I'm just going to pick some of the standard examples that I always choose. So I always pick mother, father, stepmother, stepfather, and legal guardian. You could pick fewer than that. You could pick more. It's really up to you and the purposes you need. Maybe you would like to email a grandparent. Depends on your needs. But you'll pick these and hit save. And you'll notice that I've done two things at once here, so bear with me. This pops in the filter section with relationship type. And now the next filter I'm going to apply is what's called a subquery filter. So I will be actually clicking this button here, the one-to-many symbol, next to the funnel and the filter. So click the little tiny button, and it brings up this menu here that looks different than what you do when you go into a standard filter. Here's a little idea of this closer. What I'm going to be doing is two things. I'm going to be looking for people who have an email address that exists, because those are the people we want to email. If they don't, that's going to impact our bounce rates. And I also want to find, in my case, if their first name exists, because I don't want to be emailing people and saying, dear, comma, if there's not a merge field there. So this will all make more sense as we go here, but you get to name the filter. I usually default to sort of like an APA style. That's optional, but the reason I do that is a personal preference. I like to be able to see when I'm out in my original mailing if I have created the query myself and the recipient list, or if it's something that I did in a local base. So this is just my differentiator, but not something you necessarily have to do. And for these, pretty straightforward. We don't actually need to do anything fancy. The aggregate here is what's important. We're basically saying that between the aggregate and the exports, if the relation email exists, filter. So you'll see here, when I click save, we get email address exists with the one-to-many symbol. And if you remember, we were at 50,000 something, but what this is saying is that there's about 19 or 20,000 names in our instance where there's a parent record, but they don't have an email address. Great, we don't want to email those people. I'm going to do something similar for if they have a first name. You don't have to do that because maybe your email is pretty generic and it just says dear parent or guardian. But as a best practice for me, I always like to indicate, dear Susan, dear Dave, whoever it is, and say relation first name exists. So we're doing the exact same thing. Aggregate exists, and then the first name. And you'll see here that now what we're saying is we're looking for mothers, fathers, stepmothers, and then behind this stepfather and legal guardian who have an email address that exists, who have a first name that exists. So this is all pretty straightforward so far. And then where we actually dive into configurable joins and the power of them is within our population day timestamp. And this is something that we use when we're building campaigns. I'm going to add this today, and you'll see the number will drop down to 0 because I haven't actually activated a campaign associated with this, but this is just to give you an idea of what you can do. We will name it again. Remember, we're going to start here by clicking the one-to-many symbol in order to get to a subquery filter. And we're going to be looking for, in this case, what I've named it, a relation, so mother, father, etc., who is in our population on a day that we assign, in this case, day 1. You'll notice here that we have these one-to-many symbols within the edit part. So for this, I'm actually going to click the one-to-many symbol next to export, so subquery export here. And that's going to bring out a new window. And this is where, at Carnegie and the Slate team, We always say this is configurable joins inception because you're just going layers and layers into the tables. Don't focus so much on sort of the why today, but just focus on what we're doing here. When we pop up this new window, again, we're going to name it. So day one. And we're going to actually now be joining. This is where we're going to do our joins. We can have a whole nother conversation about why someone would choose to do a join here versus one at the bottom, but that will be outside of our scope of conversation today. So stay tuned for a future Slate demo series. But we're going to click join here. And we're going to search for populations, because what we're doing is, remember when we began this query, we started on the parent and relation related table. When we jumped in there, we joined to person. So we're joining from the relation to their student. And then we're doing one more join. We're joining to populations, because populations isn't something we can access on its own from the, say, parent record, but we do need to find this through person. So we're going to search for populations. It's going to ask you the same thing it did before with, you're making the join. So just confirming that. And in this case, Slate has done the work for us. So we'll just hit save. And this allows us to search for a couple of things. You'll now see when you click into the filter of that subquery export, that you get the chance to now look at populations. And I kept this table view in here just so you can see that we were on person before, but we wanted populations. So now we've joined into that third item, populations. In our case, we're going to take two things here, name and eventually timestamp days. In fact, this is the reason we did all of this, is that timestamp days is not accessible through any table except populations. And so we needed to grab this table for that reason. If we didn't need that, well, we could have just stuck on the person table. But again, populations, because we're going to grab both name and timestamp days. So name first, and then you just pick whatever campaign you want. In this case, as a sample, I'm using our AppGen population. So that's all fine and dandy. And then I'm going to go back and do the same thing with timestamp days. Select that, and then just input the number of days I'm looking for. In this case, 1, because that's what we said. Relation in population day 1, and we're going to search for day 1. And you'll see now when we back out to the edit part, all of the different changes I've made to this part here. So to walk you through them again, we renamed it to day 1 because that's our name for it, just to help us stay apprised of what's going on in this filter. One thing I didn't mention that's important is you do need to add at least one export. It doesn't matter so much what you choose. I just default to person reference ID because it's the first one there. But you do need one export, and it will remind you of that if you've forgotten it. So not a huge deal there, but add something in. And then what I just showed is, remember, we joined from person to population. So that was by clicking join and joining person to populations. And then once we did that, we're able to just do these standard filters. And so these were the areas where I did searching for name and in our population, and searching for timestamp days and adding the number of days. When we hit save on all those different layers, we get this final screen here, and we're actually just about done. And in fact, with this query part, we are all set. So now we've said we're looking for this information to pull, the relationship's first name and email, and their student's first name. We want this information for mother, father, stepmother, stepfather, legal guardian, who have an email, who have a first name, who in this case are in our population day 1. As I promised, this does drop to 0, but if we had a rule and a population all set and ready to go, we would get some number in there. But for this example, we don't today. And then as you can see here, the join at the bottom is a person join because we were originally in the related relation base, but we also want to join to person because some of this information is for the student. So now let's put this all together, sort of the capstone. We back out into our mailing, follow our breadcrumbs, and you see a couple things. Our recipient list has now been added, so we have all this information here that we just worked on. And then the powerful piece now is sending the mailing. So let's go edit the message really quickly, and you can see that as a recipient, instead of having the parent email as a CC, as in the local base, we can now say relation email is our recipient, and we can write them a message. Dear relation first name, we're emailing you from your own Slate table. How exciting. So if you opt out of future communications, person first, i.e. the student, will still receive them. Hooray. So that's a little bit about building a configurable joins query for the parent space. Really excited that you joined us today for one of our first Slate demo series. Again, my name is Nick Porcella. I'm a Slate communications strategist with Carnegie, and would love to work with you on future projects, whether they're deliver related or not. So feel free to get in touch with me. My email, nporcella@carnegiehighered.com, or you can reach out to us through our request for information form at carnegiehighered.com. Thanks so much for joining me today, and looking forward to hearing from you again soon. Take care.